You're with Arise News in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. I'm Charles Onyekolu. It's Monday, the 13th of March. Good morning and welcome to This Day Live. In the studio with me now to look at those issues from a different perspective. Stanley is a broadcast journalist and anchor of a radio breakfast show here in Abuja. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're a guy with a reasonably big audience on the radio following you. You've got your finger on the political ticker, I am told. How high up on the political Richter scale was Mr. Buhari's absence?
Well, certainly it is something that reverberated across the country because President Buhari is a high-profile individual even before he became president. And some of the changes that he had introduced, particularly where security and corruption were concerned, had massive impact on the community. So certainly when he left the country during that period, there was a lot of anxiety as to what was going to happen next. And his political opponents had made pretty much a meal of his absence. And again, I must point out that perhaps poor handling by his media handlers about the situation. I think the recurrence of the word hale and hearty created a challenge.
It became a rather annoying term, wasn't it? Because it didn't really say anything, did it?
Because if he's hale and hearty with a country facing such economic
difficulties, why on earth is he away in England?
Why is he away from his desk?
On medical leave.
Precisely.
Now that he's back, what's been the reaction from the political community? Not just politicians, but analysts like yourself.
I think to a large extent, the response has been positive about the president's return. Of course, there are those who probably seeing the vice president step up would have thought, especially seeing a lot of the business that rallied during the time that the vice president was at the helm. But the interesting thing here is that in the past, we've seen President Buhari actually delegate. For instance, during his first instance as the head of state back in 1983 to 85, he had General Diabon, who was quite visible at the time. And so it's not a new thing for the current president. And he might want to exploit this. Interestingly, his special advisor on media and publicity, Femi Adesina, had said that the policy for the president moving forward would be eyes on, hands off. So we will continue to see the vice president.
Can you interpret those words for us?
I think it means that we'll see a lot of the vice president.
A lot of delegation.
Doing a lot of those things,
right.
Yes.
Right.
Because I think the difference that Vice President Osinbajo actually made was that he had an ability to connect better with the public, and therefore there was perhaps a placebo effect.
Right.
Some people say that there was actual improvement, but it could be a placebo effect.
Well, do you have people phoning into your program?
Certainly, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, what's their reaction to that? Because, I mean, some people would say, well, you know, if he's just going to sit there and let someone else run the country, he might as well move away and let the person run the country.
Oh, I don't think the Nigerians are really in doubt of who's in charge. I think that President Buhari can provide the vision and he can provide the steel that is needed to move Nigeria forward, but the vice president can actually provide a lot of the charisma that is required in leading a very complex country like Nigeria.
So you think the vice president's role is a more cosmetic one, more sort of visceral?
No, I think that it's a critical one.
Right.
Because when you look at a lot of tensions that have come up as a result of some of the miscommunications by the president, for instance, the famous or infamous 95% comment, and you can see how much headache that has given the administration over the past year or so. The vice president coming in and his visit to the Niger Delta, to Kaduna State, and the calming effect that he's had, I think moving forward it would be a very critical part of the success of this administration.
Is it also quite commendable that the president actually went out of his way to recognize the vice president when he came back? Because, I mean, the history of this country has been of a fairly, rough relationship between vice presidents and their presidents, where they're essentially relegated to the background and dare not breathe, otherwise their intentions might be misinterpreted. I mean, the president actually went out of his way to say that what the vice president's got going for him is youth and intellect compared to himself, who has old age and nothing but military experience. I mean, I thought that was enormously sort of, chummy of him to say
quite
that.
a compliment. It's quite a compliment. To a large extent, if you study Nigerian politics, the reason why deputies are appointed are either for political gain, perhaps to get votes from certain quarters, or perhaps because they're docile and wouldn't give the principal any problem. But I think in this case, perhaps either wittingly or unwittingly, Nigeria is getting two for the price of one.
Right. Of course, at one point, whilst the president was away, and I'm sure you probably had your finger on this button as well, there were all those rumors about some politicians, the likes of Bola Tinubu, for example. Of course, he denied it in the end, but one of the founders of the ruling APC party allegedly declaring their intention to run for president. I mean,
I think he made a clarification.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying that he obviously denied that. You think, though, that there is some disappointment in political circles that the president is back and ready to return to work?
Oh, no doubt. There would be some disappointment in some circles, particularly for those who may not support the style of the current president, or perhaps those who are a bit jittery concerning some of the things that they fear that he might do. However, I think by and large, people would be glad to see the president return to work, particularly because Nigeria is such a complex country. And we have this, whether spoken or unspoken, there's this concept of leadership coming from certain parts of the country. And nobody wants to see the country return to that. So I think that a lot of political watchers would like to see President Buhari complete his tenure in office. What would happen in 2019 is an entirely different matter.
Now, beyond political watchers and the politicians themselves, what about ordinary people? I mean, they phone into your show. How are they reacting to all of this?
In my experience, overwhelmingly, it was positive.
Right.
I think that there was a sigh of relief that the president was back and ready to work, but it doesn't remove from the fact that there will be a lot of scrutiny on this president moving on. People will be watching his body language to see whether he is healthy, whether he is fit enough to carry out the responsibilities, huge responsibilities of his office. But I think on the whole, people are positive and hopeful.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your coming in and your analysis. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, as we said at the beginning of the program, what's going to be Mr. Buhari's priority now as he slowly eases himself back into work? Well, earlier I spoke to Professor Epiphany Azinge, who's a senior advocate of Nigeria, which is the country's equivalent of a Queen's Counsel, also a member of the Commonwealth Arbitral Tribunal in London.